So I'd done a few sort of PR exercises with some journalists, and we got contacted by a journalist called Claudia Joseph, and she said, I want you to hack me. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, I really want to explore what it's like to have your kind of life taken over by hackers. And basically, I think, I'd struggle to get anyone else to volunteer to do it. So I'd like you to do it to me. So we drew up some rules of engagement and permissions and all of the things that you need to do to stay within the law. Which she found quite frustrating, which was quite amusing. Really, she was like, "Can't we just get on with it?" And I was like, "No. There's laws here. We need to kind of get all your permissions to effectively, to all intents and purposes, you almost have to give us a power of attorney to sort of access your accounts and stuff." But we decided to stay away from. The lawyers kind of told us to stay away from bank accounts and things like that because that was kind of tricky. Although we were actually allowed to access her PayPal account, so in the end, that's what we did. So we sort of hacked her, and there's a whole story behind that as to how that went, and actually it's the subject of some of the talk I'm giving this evening, because essentially what became clear was it isn't all about getting someone's credit card. The sort of the level of access you get to someone's life once you get inside their sort of their private footprint, once you get inside their shopping accounts and their email and their social media accounts and see all their photos and all that stuff. You realize that it feels fairly kind of prurient, if I'm honest, and quite unpleasant. But you can imagine as someone who was stalking someone, or someone who really meant someone ill would have an enormous amount of power. So we explored that with her, and we did a few things. We were able to track her movements because we could get photographs off her phone, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, she wrote it all up in a Mail on Sunday article, which got quite well kind of picked up. And then soon after that, this TV company called Shine TV called me up and said, "Look, we're thinking of doing this show." It didn't have a name at that point, about people going on the run. And we feel that these days there's a kind of cyber component to it, there's an online component to it. And we've read this article and we think, we'd like to talk to you. So I got involved with them quite early and we talked about what might be possible. And so that was fascinating. But then actually as part of that process, I started hacking people, which I'd only ever done, for fun before, really. And of course, you could argue it was for fun as part of Hunted as well. But and again, permissions, of course, are all in place. But it made me realize that actually people are really not very good at this stuff. They really don't get an awful lot of what I would consider to be fundamental sort of things to do with cybersecurity and online, so sort of operational security behavior, really. That obviously I've learned over many years, and because I've got a technical background, it's potentially somewhat easier for me, but it started to bother me. I thought it was time to kind of maybe write about that, maybe look at the things that ordinary users can do that don't have a technical background, that could maybe beef up their security posture a little bit. But it's interesting because one of the things that I think is the case with the security industry in general is I think it's quite, and this is probably because of historical reasons, but I think it's quite male. A lot of the language it uses is quite masculine and aggressive, and as you say, militaristic, almost born out of militaristic and espionage kind of worlds. And I think that makes it really quite sort of non-approachable, inaccessible. And actually, we're already seeing that as an industry in terms of recruitment. It's difficult, and it's getting better, but it's still difficult to persuade young women to come and join the cybersecurity industry, because I think it's perceived as being, a male-dominated and rather geeky and rather kind of, and there's a lot of aggressive male language used. And so I wanted to kind of, the cover of the book, interestingly, when I spoke to the cover designer for the book, and I said, look, I want to avoid all of the tropes that we use in cybersecurity. I don't want digital stuff on the screen with, I don't want hooded figures, usually male hooded figures. I don't want any of the stuff that the movies like to portray. I don't want any of that stuff, because I said that's just a turnoff as far as I'm concerned. It's just not, I want to, send a more positive message out about this is something you can do to kind of protect yourself. You can take control of your online life and your digital footprint. You can actually you can take stress away from your digital life. We've got to a place now where actually most of my professional life is spent with sort of leadership teams and boards, because we finally managed to get cyber onto the board agenda. Hooray, well done. And now, guess what? They're asking some really hard questions, and they don't like jargon, heavy answers, and they don't like phrases like demilitarized zone or you know, threat actor. Yeah, we might be able to get away with that, but you know, that a lot of that jargonized language, both technical jargon and also the slightly more militaristic stuff we were talking about a minute ago, I don't think that helps the cause at all. I think what people want to understand is, what is the risk to my business? How do I manage that risk? And they sound like simple questions, but they get answered with all sorts of gobbledygook. And I just think we make a huge mistake every time we do that. So I'm a great believer in trying to de-gobbledygook, if that's a word. I suspect it isn't. The whole kind of area of cybersecurity. And I accept a lot of my colleagues that they say, well, we don't want to use analogies all the time because they're not accurate. They're not technically accurate, you know. And I'm saying, yeah, but I accept that, and I'm all for accuracy, you know, but it has its place. And I think when you're trying to communicate to a non-technical audience, you know, falling back into jargon because it's technically accurate, I think you've lost your audience and therefore you've missed your objective.